An original podcast from podlatino.com.
There's a very specific moment when something changes. Not the emergency itself, but the second right before your brain finishes processing what's happening. An alarm you weren't expecting. A thud in the hallway. Smoke appearing where there should be nothing. Lights going out without warning. That instant has a very particular quality. Your body already wants to move, but your mind hasn't quite figured out which direction yet. That's where the real problem starts. Not in the fire, not in the power outage, not in the person who just fell. The problem starts in the automatic response that kicks in before thought does. Running without knowing where. Yelling without saying anything useful. Grabbing your phone to record everything before checking if someone actually needs help. Or freezing completely, waiting for someone else to take charge. The first few minutes of an emergency are the hardest to handle well, precisely because they combine three things at once: surprise, pressure, and a lack of information. You don't know yet how serious it is. You don't know how many people are involved. You don't know whether the danger has grown, stopped, or is still moving. And in that gap, your brain does what it always does when there's no plan. It reacts with whatever comes first. The good news is that this has a fix. It doesn't require military training or specialized courses. It just requires understanding how that first minute works and having a basic framework to organize it. The first thing worth understanding is that staying calm doesn't mean feeling nothing. That's a very common misconception. Real calm, the kind that actually works in an emergency, doesn't belong to someone who feels no fear. It belongs to someone who feels everything but manages to keep their actions in order anyway. Fear is a normal physiological response to danger, and no amount of training eliminates it. What changes with preparation isn't the emotion itself. It's the ability to act well while that emotion is fully present. That difference is everything. The second key point is to stop before you act. Just 1 second. Literally one. Because that single pause can prevent a chain of mistakes that are very hard to undo later. Before you move, look. What's happening? Where is the danger? Is it close to you? Is it still active? Is there smoke, fire, water, loose cables, unstable structure, traffic, people running? 1 second of observation is worth more than 10 seconds of disorganized movement. This has a technical name in emergency protocols, but in everyday practice, it comes down to one simple question. Am I safe where I'm standing right now? Because if the answer is no, that's the first thing to fix, before helping anyone, before calling anyone, before anything else. A person who becomes another victim doesn't help. They multiply the problem. The recommended sequence has 5 steps and is easy to remember. Stop, observe, protect, communicate, act. It's not a rigid formula to follow word for word in every situation. It's an order of priorities for when your mind wants to skip steps and walk straight into the smoky room, or move someone who's fallen without knowing what happened to them, or run in the same direction as everyone else without knowing where that leads. Stop means letting your brain process for at least 3 seconds before making an irreversible decision. Observe means doing a quick scan of the environment. Visible dangers, possible exits, people who need help, areas to avoid. Protect means making your own safety the first step, not as selfishness, but as a precondition for being able to help at all. Communicate means asking for help in a useful way, not just shouting. And act means choosing the most reasonable course of action with the information you have right now, without waiting for complete certainty. On the subject of asking for help, It's worth slowing down for a moment, because there's a huge difference between asking vaguely and asking effectively. Saying there's a problem tells nobody anything. Saying there's smoke on the third floor of the building at the corner of 5th and Main, there are at least 4 people who can't get out, and the elevator isn't working gives whoever receives that call exactly what they need to respond. When you call emergency services or speak to someone who can help, useful information has 4 parts: what is happening, where it is happening, how many people are affected, and what visible risks are present. That's enough. Everything else can wait. Something similar applies when there are other people nearby. If you're in a space with a group and nobody knows what to do, the tendency is either for everyone to do the same thing or for nobody to do anything. Both extremes are problems. What works is assigning specific tasks. Not someone call for help, but pointing to a specific person and telling them directly to make the call. Not someone find an exit, but asking one identifiable person to go right and check for a way out. Vague instructions under pressure disappear into the air. Specific ones get followed. There are things you shouldn't do even when they seem logical in the moment. Don't move someone who has fallen or been injured unless there's an immediate danger that justifies it, like active fire or risk of collapse. Moving someone with a spinal injury without knowing what you're doing can cause permanent damage. If the area is safe, the best approach is to leave them where they are and wait for medical assistance. It's also not a good idea to walk into a smoke-filled area without protection, touch downed cables, even if they look inactive, or try to put out a fire that's already out of control with whatever you have on hand. These impulses come from a genuine desire to help and are completely understandable, but in many cases, they end up adding victims instead of reducing them. Another point worth raising is the difference between a real emergency, intense discomfort, and collective panic. They're not the same thing, and they don't deserve the same response. A power outage in a building with no windows can cause a lot of anxiety, but it's not a high-risk emergency. One person who starts running down a hallway can cause others to run too, even when there's no actual danger. Before you get swept up in the emotional state around you, take that pause and ask yourself how serious the situation actually is. Your phone deserves its own moment here. It's a genuinely useful tool in emergencies. Phone calls, flashlight, shared location, brief messages, system alerts. But it can also become a distraction that pulls you out of the present at exactly the moment you need to be most in it. Using it wisely means, first look at what's happening, then use the phone for whatever the situation actually needs. Not the other way around. And watch your battery. In many urban emergencies, phone battery is the scarcest and most necessary resource there is. If you're in a building, on public transit, in a school, or in a shopping center when something happens, there's a simple habit that costs nothing before anything even goes wrong. Find the exits, locate the stairs, and identify the security staff. This isn't paranoia. It's the same thing anyone does when they walk into a movie theater and quietly note where the doors are. Information stored in advance saves time and pressure when you need both most. And about following the crowd. It's not always the right move. People who run in an emergency aren't always running toward safety. Sometimes they run away from where danger is currently visible. But that doesn't mean they're heading toward the way out. Watching where people are going and asking yourself whether it makes sense before joining them can make a meaningful difference. In an emergency, the first few minutes don't ask you to be brave or to have all the answers. They ask you not to hand complete control over to impulse. Feeling fear is part of the process. Getting confused is too. Nobody walks out of an unexpected situation feeling confident from the very first second. But somewhere between confusion and paralysis, between fear and an irreversible mistake, There's a small opening where thought can fit. A pause. A look around. One simple decision. That's what makes the difference. Not heroism, not advanced training. The ability to stay present just long enough to choose your next step with some degree of judgment. That's not something you learn in the middle of a crisis. You learn it beforehand, when everything is quiet, when there's time to think clearly about how your mind behaves when something goes wrong. And when the real moment comes, that quiet preparation is what allows those first few minutes to be the beginning of a solution rather than the beginning of the problem.